There are 120 or so of us gathered, and we went over the recommendations in the 2001 paper that I took. Yes?
Four or five.
It's five. Okay.
Yeah.
I made a mistake. I'll just change it before I send the slides to you. It's five. As I said, I was a part of the delegation, 120 of us sitting in the room discussing CDD, and I was so proud that the co-chair that produced this paper was the chairman of the Offshore Group of Banking Supervisors. It didn't just come from the Basel Committee talking down to us. We had an integral part to play in producing this paper. We tried to make it as relative as possible, not just to onshore banks, but offshore banks as well, or international banking groups. And one of the things that we stressed or was stressed in the meeting itself was that it was important to ensure that banks were equipped with the adequate controls and procedures to implement an appropriate KYC framework. And if you measure the paper, the recommendations of this paper versus the FATF recommendations, they're a little bit more stringent. So banks will take the higher road vis-a-vis the FATF. They will implement CDD because their supervisors will ensure that they do. Because we thought it more appropriate. As I said before, the banks are the crux. You can have securities, you can have insurance, but the flows of money goes through what? Banks. Okay? And we thought it'd be a little bit more appropriate to have a bit more stringent controls in place. Again, we acknowledge due diligence on new and existing customers were a key part of those controls. And as you know, our compendium of legislation, December 2000, did not only commit new, but existing as well. And that was one of the touchy points in the Bahamas with respect to especially international licensees, because they've had clients and client groups with them for over 30, 40 years, and here we were going back to probably the settlers of trust and all the rest of it being dead, and this next generation in control. How do they get their documentation? But we thought it was very important. You had to know your customer, and if you had to know your customer, that meant all of them, not a select few. And again, with that, we taught due diligence. Banks can become subject to reputational, operational, legal, concentration risks, which can result in significant financial costs. And this is not just banks. This is any financial provider where reputation comes into it, operational, legal, and where most of your business comes from a particular group or client, there is concentration risks. Because your business become more volatile if you have a few, let me turn this down. Does anybody know? What's the phone? Okay. If you have a few clients, then your whole business can be in jeopardy if one of those clients pull out. It's always a risk when you have a few clients that you depend on heavily. So it's due diligence, of course, is pertinent for all businesses. Sound CDD policies and procedures, critical, very critical to protecting and safeguarding the businesses and the banking system as a whole, whether it's the national, regional, or global. Bahamas and the Caribbean, we're linked. When one of them sneezes, if one of those Canadian banks sneezes, more than likely, all of us will catch a cold because we are linked. Okay? The three main banks and two of the smaller Canadian banks are represented in the Caribbean. We don't have Toronto Dominion anymore. We used to have them, but the other three definitely is across the Caribbean. Of course, they're scaling back, as persons would have seen in the papers, but they're still very, very integral to our system. Okay, so again, CDD, it is critical in effective management of operational AML, CFT, whatever risk you put there. With safeguards, go beyond just simple account opening and record keeping. You always must remember that your CDD has to be dynamic. The MLRO CO has to always be on their guard because intelligence could come from anywhere. The news, CNN, Fox, Bloomberg, Reuters, and then your local periodicals, the internet. You are always looking and, should I say, assessing what is going on. So it's incumbent upon you to know your main clients, especially the higher risk group, so that anything that catches your eye, you need to update your risk profiles because of your ongoing monitoring obligations under the FTRA. Okay? It requires providers to formulate customer acceptance policy and a tiered customer identification program. This is where your risk-based approach comes in. That involves more intensive due diligence for higher risk accounts and includes proactive account monitoring for suspicious activities. Always in the back of your head. That's why I told you before. Anytime I'm looking at an application or looking, especially for license, if we could stop, should I say, risks coming in at the beginning, then you don't have to look at it or look for it in the end. And it's always, because I go back to my grandma, she said, bend that tree while it's young. If you would get it at the beginning, then you don't have to worry about it in the end. So I'm always suspicious. Looking all over the place, especially if we go on site. Again, not to say we don't trust our licensees, the other regulators don't trust you, but you're always at a heightened level because the criminals are always 3 steps ahead, especially in their typologies. You just thinking about insurance products and pretzel jams, and they down the road in some complex structure. We're always catching up as regulators and professionals. Okay? And I must stress here the need for vigorous standards. And it is not restricted to banks or securities firms or insurance. Any service provider, any FCSP that is in the business of financial services need to be proactive and have a vigorous system. Okay? The Basel Committee actually in 2001 mentioned that not just banks, but all non-bank financial institutions and professional intermediaries, such as lawyers and accountants, need to develop such a system. Okay? It makes the other mainstream providers' job a little easier if everybody do their part. Compliance Commission, SCB, again, has developed CDD and it's on their website. An important element, if you're getting down to it, who is your client? Okay? CDD, this is gonna get very annoying.
That's one of the things we need to learn.
I know. Hello, can you cut your volume down, please? Thanks. Okay. It's an important element of CDD, verifying who is your actual client. And that's important because you could be verifying the wrong person. So you need to understand who is your actual client. The next step, once you have established that, is verifying the identity, the nationality, the source of funds or wealth, as per your risk rating of the, let's say an initial information package. Then the determination of the services to be allowed or to be offered, the intended use of volume of business of the relationships to be established. Of course, that's parameters. You're getting into the meat of your CDD. And then your risk rating of the relationships. And finally, you're ready to ascertain or look over, obtain the entire document package, which will be required to monitor the relationships. Okay? So, again, it's important. Know exactly who you're dealing with. And this is important because some people will be so professional, so good at hiding the identity of who they're dealing with or dealing for. You have to look behind, and in your book, it has a note on intensive, almost interrogation. They call it interview. But, especially if it's going to be a substantial client with varied products that they are asking you to offer to them, you have a right to interview them and to get to the bottom, to ensure for yourself that they are not dealing on behalf of other persons. Okay? Verification naturally comes in with your source of funds, and source of wealth. Alright? Risk rating. Getting into the meat of it now. In the 2000 paper, of course, very important to stress that KYC policies and procedures have particular relevance, not just to banks. I have banks here, but all providers, service providers. These policies assist in preventing reputation risk and serves to preserve the integrity of the banking system or the financial system by preventing the use for criminal purposes. This is gonna drive me nuts. Anyway. I'm telling you, probably do it, darling, do it.
It's broken?
Oh, they have to mute their side, she said.
Yeah,
If I mute it, then they won't get on.
yeah, they probably won't have it.
Okay, you turn down the volume. Okay. Okay. Let's try it, all right? With respect to the risk rating framework, all providers, not just the licensees of the banks and trusts or SCB or ICBs, all providers in the Bahamas were mandated to come up with an a risk rating framework. And this was in the amendments going into December 2003. I remember that night because it was the last day of the year when nobody's supposed to be to work. And we were waiting and waiting. They were saying, yes, it's going to cabinet. No, the parliament. And we're waiting for the dialogue to begin, because once the dialogue begins, then the minister might call for information, or they need some substantive, whatever, evidence. Sometimes they do that when they are dialoguing on the House floor. They'll call the central bank, or they'll call the AG, or, office, trying to get information to answer questions. So we stayed there, and it was late, but they got it through. The 31st of December, the framework, everybody had to develop a risk rating framework. And it's because on the face of it, we did not want persons, we did not want persons not having an adequate base for coming up with documentation, because we had a problem. In 2000 December, we put out this, amendments here, there, and everywhere. And then we introduced new laws. And then everybody on the 1st of January 2001 was high risk. I told you that before. Everybody, without exception. The Grammy, who just gets her pension, the parliamentary, the MPs, down to the governor, down to you and me. And everybody had to bring in all of this documentation, and everybody was frustrated. And even I was getting ticked off of one of the banks, but I went in and on. But we kept putting back the date for them to be fully compliant, the accounts to be fully compliant. Those who work in the banks got letters from us. And I think the last date that we put in was, I think it was 2004. We kept pushing it back 6 months, because it was such a tedious task. And you didn't want to stop commerce. You didn't want to stop people being able to transact across their accounts. But it was so difficult. The banks just didn't have the system in place to put all this documentation into their computer systems and whatnot, so it wasn't readily available, so everybody had to fill out source of funds every time they go into the banks, and people calling us, routing us out. And then I was wondering if I needed my daughter, who's a brown belt, and my son, who's a brown belt, to walk me to my car, because we were getting so much problems. But anyway, we got it done. And in 2004, June, everybody had to have their risk rating framework in place, at least the banks. I'm not sure about the other providers. And what this did, of course, was once they put it in, then they only had to update it. The risk rating framework is supposed to be dynamic as well. It's not static. It's not a static document, because other risks or intelligence will come to you that you need to put into your system to assess your clients. Okay? So the provider is required to develop through understanding of inherent ML CFT risks, present in their customer base, the services offered, including products under development or to be launched. So it was forward-looking. We wanted a lot of thinking to go into this framework, and the jurisdictions within which its customers do business or was based. And it's not just do customers, it where they're based as well. Like the example I gave you last week, somebody born in Switzerland now living in the States and have children born in Europe, and so it's a whole jungle out there with respect to cross-border intelligence. Again, in order to put your risk rate framework together, a full review have to be done of your client base, the existing client base, and with intelligence, operational and transaction data, other internal data you may have had, as well as external sources of information, such as persons who are in CEO or MLRO positions. If you don't like reading, leave the class now. You have to love reading. So a lawyer is naturally a fit here. All they need to do is understand the products and what they are looking at, but they are a natural fit because they love to read. I mean, I could not, and somebody said I could be a good lawyer. I can't be. I hate reading. So you wonder, well, how you get where you are? I had to get to love what I need to read. I don't read things that I don't need to read. Okay? Outside of assessments and all the rest of it, I read my Bible. You know what I mean? I don't like frivolous reading. So, again, you need to read. These are now on the website, the IMF. The IMF.org website should be a favorite website of yours because it's updated daily with different assessments of different countries.
What's that, IMF?
IMF.org. The IMF, I'm mentioning them because they have done, I think, probably, although they get a lot of flack, the most objective type kind of assessments. Because of course the FATF is a little skewed, although you get some of them doing some of the assessments for the IMF. I think they have more control and they try to be a little bit more objective. So national risk assessments, country reports from international agencies and organizations, of course, that's where FATF comes in. And your regional style, CFATF or FATF bodies, because they have reviews and whatnot as well. As a matter of fact, I just heard Guyana on the news again. Anybody heard the intelligence about them? Any of your clients coming from Guyana, unfortunately, will probably have to have enhanced due diligence because they, in the words of the Commonwealth Secretariat, they have been very slow in upgrading their AML legislation and legislative framework. And they have been pointed out by the CFATF. And I can tell you, I was going to CFATF meetings probably since 15 years ago. And Guyana always came up. So it's not an overnight thing. We're not singling them out for special mention. They just, I don't know, I thought our wheels turned slow. but theirs ain't turning at all. You know the kind of way? Okay. Policies and procedures for customer due diligence, acceptance, due diligence, ongoing monitoring has to be designed. Not should be, but has to be, and implemented to adequately control those identified inherent risks. And the inherent risks, basically I'm going to talk with risk factors, but you're looking at environmental risk, where that person lives. You're looking at regulatory, you're looking at reputational, you're looking at operational, you're looking at fiduciary, you're looking at AML, CFT, you're looking at a whole lot of risks. Okay? So again, once you get to identify the risks that are related to your client base, then you would have the intelligence to put your framework in place. It should be appropriate for the type of products offered by the provider and capable of assessing the level of potential risk each client, not a client group, each client relationship poses to the provider. We had a task on our hand. January 1st, 2001, we decided we're going to do some AML. The first things we're going to do to cut our teeth on is AML assessments. And the first bank we went into, of course, we picked a juicy one. We wanted to get our teeth sink in real good. So one that we had suspicions about, we went in. And of course, the people almost had a heart attack, because this was the first on-site examination that we were conducting. And everybody was hoping and praying it didn't be them. So you had people actually having I'm not joking, actually having palpitations when they were called in for an interview. Okay? Because this was a 360. We had never gone in before. If we needed information, we sent in auditors, accountants. But now the central bank was coming in themselves, and the law changed so radically, saying that we could ask for anything. Anything. Okay, our desire to carry out our job. So, again, and when we went in to review what they should have had from 1995, the first Money Laundering Act. We say, we'll be kind. Of course, you can't have everything in place December 31st, 2000, and they're coming in the second week of January, we started the on-site examinations. And guess what? Everybody we went into had some gaps. Every soul. Okay? So the framework, again, it has to be appropriate for the type of products. The framework for money transmission business versus fiduciary versus just plain vanilla deposits in a commercial bank. They're going to be different. And we want to see that in your framework. There's no clip and paste here. It has to be relevant to your client base. Okay? So minimum requirements of such a framework. What are they? Differentiation of client relationships by risk categories. Now, some people have 5. We recommend 3. We don't recommend 2. Some people have high or low. And what that tends to do, Ms. O'Brien, is that those who are medium go into where? Low. They're not going to put it in high. They'll have a shade of gray here and there, and they'll put everybody in low. No. Usually we would like to see a little bit more differentiation, high, medium, or low. Differentiation of client relationships by risk factors. Now you're looking at the products. Now you're looking at the client type, the profession, the country of domicile, and persons. Even your profession could be a red flag. And because us professionals, they come to us to do the money laundering, guess what? Some of our professions may be a tad bit on the high side. Okay? So, client type, professions, country of domicile, complexity of ownership. Anytime you have a complex structure, you need to look a little deeper. Make sure you know what you're looking at. Okay, if you don't understand it, call them in, interview them to the hilt until you understand it. Because you have to risk rate them properly. And when we get back down to it, that higher risk and PEPs have to be escalated upwards for approval. And if you're recommending this to a committee or to the board or senior management as a PEP, it has to be substantiated, it has to be supported. Or you're gonna have egg on your face. Okay? And that's not good when you have junior officers looking up at you. That feel bad. Legal structure, source of business, type of assets, size, volume of transactions, type of transactions, cash transactions, adherence to client activity profile, all these things come into it. Alright? So your opening documents have to be very, very substantive, even though the clients might get a little tips. Sit them down, give them some coffee, get them comfortable, but you gotta get the information. Okay? Oh, looks like I double up on that one. Okay, KYC documentation and due diligence information requirements appropriate for each risk category and risk factor. Okay? Once you start to get your risk categories in line, high, medium, low, then you start to frame what documentation you need. And of course the guidelines give you some guidance there. Process for approval of downgrade or upgrade of risk ratings. It's not complete because risk ratings are not static. I mean the plumber, what is his name? Joe the plumber? Who knew him before Obama spoke to him? Nobody. Now Joe's running for the Senate. Or he was. I think he's running for Senate. Even Clay Aiken running. You know, the singer from Idol. I mean, come on. He probably low risk when he began because he probably didn't have no money enough anyway. Now, he's moving into politics. So he's a what? He'll become a parent. So again, your framework need to be dynamic. It will not be static. And again, you know, somebody who's very nosy makes a good CEO. And MLRO. I'm telling you, they get into everybody's business. Girl, you hear that? Ooh, girl, what else you hear? You know, that kind of person is always going to be looking for news. It might be good to whoever else, but that kind of person is going to be able to dig up some stuff, okay? Because they like the juicy stuff. Essential reviews. When we first went in, and everybody was just stuck on high. Yes, high risk category is supposed to take up most of your time and effort and your money. However, because the whole thing is not static, and remember Joe the plumber and Clay Aiken, if you allow the low risk not to get no reviews, and things start changing underneath you and you don't even know, you're going to be surprised. So guess what? When we go in, we like to see a ladder. High, maybe every year or whatever it is. Medium, maybe another 18 months or so, 2 years. And low, probably every 2 years to 2.5 years or something like that. Because of course, as we said before, the institutions like to run compliance programs on a budget, it seems. Everybody else get to spend and go, but sometimes it's only one person, so you can't do everything one time. So you need to prioritize, and the higher risk category is where you put your effort, but don't forget the low and the medium risk clients, okay? Reviews should be risk-based, and as such, the frequency of same will be dependent on the risk category of clients. That's what I was just saying, nice little sentence, you know? Such frequency should be determined by your senior management, which oversees the control function. Of course, you'll put your plan to them if you're not the senior person, and you justify your plan, and you document, okay? All right. Any change in risk ratings. This is very important because you have to document it, because when the examiners come in and they're looking, they pull an account where you change your rating, and all they see is the change. There's no explanation. You know you're getting pulled in. Especially if it went down high and then it went to low. You're going to have to justify why you did that. Okay, so document fully the basis for your change or your termination of the relationship. And if it's high, of course, it's going to be reported upward, so that management could sign off and the board as appropriate. Policy should be very clear as to who has the authority to terminate relationships or even sanction changes. Okay? The framework should also identify, which should be earmarked for enhanced due diligence. And that's where your PEPs come in. All your high risk or other high risk clients. Okay? Approval should be fully documented, usually placed before the board, because any enhanced risk to the operations is the responsibility of the board. They should be fully informed. And your guidelines, whether it's SCB or the central bank or the CDD, all of them mention that you need to have that graduation to the board with respect to high risk and PEPs. Okay? Now, your homework said you have to do risk analysis. This is the basis of your risk analysis. A risk-based approach to AML, CFT, involves three main considerations. What are you going to be looking at when you look at the information in your case is information for you to identify the risks that this company is faced with. Okay? And you name them. There's some elements in there that point to reputational, to operational, regulatory risk. Okay? So you're going to look at, you're going to identify what risks, and then you're going to assess them. And assessing means the next one. You're looking at the risk itself. Have they mitigated against these risks? It don't look so, because they were mentioned in the report, right? As weaknesses and gaps. So again, these are the three elements: risk identification and assessment, risk mitigation, and risk after you have put in your systems.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then,
Sorry.
then you're going to risk monitor your client base, because ongoing obligations are part of the law. Okay? Risk identification. You're assessing the scale and impact of money laundering. Those three risks that I identified, you have to consider them, considering the country customer's origin, meaning their nationality, the locale of their residency, and the locale of their business. It could be in 3 different places. Okay? The products and services to be offered, and again, any intelligence. Can't stress that enough. Intelligence about the person, about their business, their operations, their connections. In your book, you have a very good example. One of those Asian countries. When you read it, you'll see it in CDD. The gentleman had a son. He was promoted, I think, to some PEP position. And he went bad, corrupt. And he was found to be transferring funds or this way, that way. And the son's account was, frozen. Okay, it was a case was brought against him. But he had a very good lawyer, and he was able to prove that his business was not intertwined with that of his father. Okay? So again, when you're looking at assessing, that's why you have to dig a little deeper, get your wealth, source of wealth, because the son of a PEP is naturally a PEP. So you have to, again, dig deeper, all right? So intelligence in the market is very good, because if the case said that if they had dug a little deeper, they would have seen that he had his own independent businesses or whatever, with his own independent wealth. His father didn't have to pass him no corrupt proceeds. Okay, so that is why you need to dig a little deeper with these clients. Risk mitigation. Application of measures appropriate for controlling possible impact of the identified risks. Again, you're looking for control systems, policies, procedures. You may have to put some in if they're not there. With respect to money transmission businesses, we have a couple in the non-bank money transmission businesses in the domestic economy. I think it's Sun Transfer and the other one. What's that insurance company? BA Financial. They have one as well. They have to deal with a commercial bank because they can't transfer funds themselves. They operate outside of a bank. So what is a bank going to do with that kind of client? They're going to have to put in proper controls, systems, and enhanced monitoring, because money transmission business, as your CDD chapter says, is very susceptible to money laundering and small little transfers here and there. That's how the 9/11 hijackers got their money into the country. So again, if you're in commercial banking, you need to put some kind of systems in place to alert you. Probably a very small floor for those accounts. Or, of course, interview extensively to see what's the volume of their business. And even, I would go even as far as to say, who are your regular customers? Although they have most occasional customers coming in, because they're not like a bank where they would have customers that come in every day or every month. People do it as they need it. But who are your most regular customers? Okay, because they're doing business what? On behalf of another. Risk monitoring. There's systems and controls, stay abreast of changes, looking at risk profiles of clients, enhanced monitoring, going up to the board to be accountable. Okay? So again, looking at your system to make sure it's dynamic, make sure it's appropriate for your business. Okay? And we might not like it, but fiduciary business on its own is high risk. If you're very lenient with your risk ratings and you're a bank or a trust company, when we go in and you don't substantiate it properly, you're written up very harshly. Because on its own, fiduciary asset management is high risk. Most of your customers are non-face-to-face people, whole mail. You're looking at high risk. Okay? You get where I'm coming from. Okay. The risk factors that you need to look at. Service providers, yeah. When assessing relationships, we've been talking about it, the geographical origin of your customer. Where are they from? Where they live now. Might be 2, 3 different places. Don't be one of those guys from California. They have a home in Paris and a home in Italy and a home in the, well, I shouldn't say home, an island, Johnny Depp. Not that he is high risk, but I just saw him in the papers the other day. Geographical sphere of customers' business activities. Location of counterparties. Who is he dealing with? Who is major counterparties? He might not be a risk, but when you dig a little further, who is he dealing with that could get funds into his business and then into your bank? You gotta go a little further, okay? Whether the customer is otherwise connected with certain high-risk jurisdictions. Not that they should not be. Nigeria have a lot of economic activity. Oil. You can't tell Shell or who is that, Exxon or British Oil or whoever else in the oil fields in Nigeria not to go to Nigeria. But you need to be aware if you are their main banker or their main, should I say, management of excess funds, because of course these giants of companies, they have funds that they put through different fiduciary relationships as well. So you need to be aware of that, okay? Those known to the licensee who lack proper standards in prevention of money laundering, definitely Nigeria is on, if you remember, the list, okay? And maybe for more than one reason. Okay, oil. You can't get their hand on it too much. countering the financing of terrorism, or in the customer due diligence process, sorry. So be very careful of it. That, number 2, is very important. Nature of the customer's business, which may be particularly susceptible to money laundering or terrorist financing, such as casinos. Cash, 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 cash. Okay? And people are obsessed with casinos. And so it's a criminal. Because there have been high typologies where you have persons come in with cash and then they leave after an hour or so of casually doing their gambling, and they have the casino, nice little check, settling with what's left on their account. And then that person goes to a bank. You see what I'm saying? Or a trust company or a securities firm. Okay? Again, nature of activity. Make sure you understand it. Don't just get surface information. Frequency of activity. And you're talking about the account now. Frequency of activity. Customer type. Potentates. I haven't seen that in so long. I'm not even sure what it means. Potentates. Politically exposed persons. Potentates. I thought of the Pope. You think we could pinpoint the Pope as a pep? He's head of, well, especially what's going on right now in the Vatican. They just, what you call it? They accused one of the canons of money laundering. I think he has a case. He was coming in with cases of cash and whatnot. So, and this is not the first time that the Vatican has been involved in money laundering. If anybody heard of Banco Ambrosiano? People were hanging themselves left, right, and center. I'm sure they were hanging themselves, but anyway. So, politically exposed persons. No, they were actually, I mean, it was so colorful because you wouldn't believe it. I worked with Banco Ambrosiano for a summer in 1978 before all of this went up in smoke. And I'm like, my goodness, if I was still there? And I was wondering if I saw anything that I should have reported. I couldn't remember. I was a junior person, very junior person. So, but I heard of the guy that he come to Nassau at one point to visit with the managing director, and they found him hanging.
Calvin.
It was a Calvin? Yeah, they found him hanging from London Bridge or something. And I'm like, oh Lord, it's good that I got out of that place. You know, as a young person trying to get into the financial system, whoa. Anyway. You get some very colorful cases, okay? Type, value, complexity of the facility, unwillingness of the customer to cooperate. That is definitely a red flag. Now, it could be somebody who is very sensitive about disclosing. Not that they have anything to hide criminally. And you have to be, this is why you understand where your customers are coming from. The customers from Latin America, they have, a need to be secret. They are faced with a lot of kidnappings, and not just the rich. You have, I went to Venezuela about probably 10, 12 years ago. Chavez wasn't there. And during our stay there, one of the taxi cab drivers now got kidnapped, and they were keeping him for ransom until his family come up with $5,000 something. How could they come up with $5,000? These people, you see what I'm saying? Back then the inflation was, I was rich. I changed $100 US and I had, I don't know how much money in my hand. So again, how are they gonna come up with $5,000? Anyway, some of them need to be secretive. So you need to know where your customers are coming from and where they're coming from in their mind. Can I give this information to these people? I want them to do business for me, but my children, my family, even their employees in Brazil. I think one got kidnapped not too long ago. So it's very, very difficult. So again, unwillingness here, but where they're coming from, and it's relative. Process, if it's for no apparent reason, then you have an issue here. Pattern of activity, given the licensee information on the customer. Okay? For a corporate customer, unduly complex structures. Again, that's a red flag for heightened scrutiny if you take them on. Okay? Whether there's any form of delegated authority in place, powers of attorney. Of course, that's an inroad to who you're dealing with or who you're dealing for. If you miss that question and they say yes, they have a power of attorney, then I need to write you up myself. Okay? The product or service used by the customer, bearer shares is always a bad word these days. And it's a bad word for you, because if that customer can issue bearer shares, who are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Unless they give you the bearer shares and you put it in your vault, and you will know who you're dealing with, right? Okay, so you be very careful of companies who are dealing with bearer shares. Situations where the origin of wealth and or source of funds cannot be easily verified, or where the audit trail has been deliberately broken and or unnecessarily layered. Again, you're looking at complex structures with a trust here, a company here, a foundation here. They seem to be having all these things and in different jurisdictions. So they're not just layering with products or vehicles, but also jurisdictions. So you have a lot of conflicting confidentiality and secrecy laws. Okay? Whether an account business relationship is dormant. Now this is a dangerous thing in more ways than one. In the commercial banks, they attract idle minds. Over the years, we've had a lot of people get in trouble because they see $2 million laying in a fixed deposit and it's been rolling over for the last 10 years, so ain't nobody is going to mind if I borrow a little. I'm telling you. We have had it done. Just recently, was it Royal Bank? In Andros or something, or whatever it was. People putting their hands where they shouldn't be. You know? Or taking the interest off the account. Well, I didn't touch the principal. You can't wrong me for that. The person ain't using it. I needed to pay my mortgage. Well, I don't think the judge is going to be too nice. You know what I mean? Anyway, very careful with that. Okay? Again, it could be for a reason that it's dormant. And a lot of times, it's because the principal person died and did not let the wife or the children know, or they were too small when they established the account in the Bahamas. We've had cases where it's deliberate, where the gentleman had two families and never the twain meet again. You know that kind of how? We've had that happen, where we've had lawyers approach the central bank for help because they have a feeling that there is a trust here with assets because they intercepted a letter going to so and so. Lord. I said, don't get me in the middle of that. That's a court case. Okay? So again, be careful of that. Any other information that before I go on, your processes and framework should have policies with respect to that. We always ask for that. Some banks don't even deal with it. And they didn't even begin to think about it until the amendment in the law, the Banks and Trust Companies Regulations Act, actually started transferring dormant accounts to the central bank. And then everybody looked up. Wow, we were supposed to. Yeah, you were supposed to. And we found some of them actually taking little balances into their profit and loss. Well, the person didn't come after 10 years, so it's causing us too much money to keep on the books. I said, that's not yours, you're a thief. Okay. Any other, and that is commercial and offshore accounts. So we have two little funds going on, side by side, foreign currency and B dollars. We don't take it into our books. But soon you will hear about a dormant account amendments. We're gonna amend it to bring it up to date, to ensure that none of the banks look at that interest or look at that little account and take it into their profit and loss. They've already stopped because we stopped them by directive of the governor. Maybe the other regulatory agencies need to look at that as well, because I'm sure there's brokerage accounts for the securities industry that persons may have died, others don't know about it, and it's there, and maybe it ain't there no more, because there might be a couple people who... But anyway, any other information that raises suspicion or for the customer being connected to money laundering or terrorist financing, okay? Now, verification of customer identity. We are talking about natural and legal persons. And the identity is not just the picture. I was doing a little training session and I said, define identity for me. What makes it up? The young lady, she thought she really had it. Oh, yeah. It's not it. I know. The picture of the person. Because she knows. No, but she was thinking of, I said, suppose that person don't come into your bank. But again, it comprises the physical identity, your name, your date of birth, your nationality, and we take into the activity as well. All of that defines you. Okay? The provider must be satisfied that the person is who he say, she purports to be, and that there's sufficient documentation because of your ongoing monitoring obligation on the nature of the business to be undertaken, expected or predicted pattern of transactions to enable appropriate monitoring. A lot of people stop at what's the business to be undertaken. They never look forward. Okay? So take into account the three aspects. Undertaken at the time, expected or predicted. Because circumstances change, and instead of going back and be calling, you could have certain information already. Now, of course, some people might not be able to, I know. She said they like to say unknown. Make sure you have something around those persons to meaning their account. They have to give you something. That's the only way you could properly monitor. If you have unknown, it could be $1 million today and $10 tomorrow. Don't make sense. They know. Okay? They know. They're not coming to you to set up an account with $5 million and don't know. Somebody with that kind of money, they know. Okay? FTRA and the FTRR, again, obligates information for natural persons. And we went over that before. I just want to list them again. Name, date of birth, nationality, and the nature of the business and activity to be undertaken. This is the minimum amount of information. It should be the floor. You go up from there with the requirements as per your institution. Okay, and your head office might have some other requirements as well. All natural persons must be identified definitively. And that's why, even though the law says simplified CDD, you get that information, you have to naturally verify it. So there's really no class of a facility holder that you do not have documentation on. You may vary it to accommodate, like the Grammy who does not have a passport or a license. You see what I'm saying? So you may vary it, but you have to have something to identify that person definitively. Okay?
Mrs.
Yes.
What about countries that have these national
ID
IDs that don't expire? They're issued from 1928, and persons, like you say, they don't have a passport, they don't have a driver's license. How acceptable? Because you can see these people, that was when the person was 17.
if they don't have a passport.
Don't have a passport.
Well, I'll tell you,
They
before
don't travel or anything.
the Swiss have it, and I think some Latin American countries have it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. well, some of them, most of them have passports, but I understand. There might be people who don't. Again, in the guidelines itself, it has, the guidelines have situations where you would have alternative documentation for verification purposes. For instance, that national ID, they could get a copy of it and have it certified. Certified by well, they have several persons that you could get to certify. And they should have somebody saying that this is the person. Depending on what volume or services that they are trying to get from you, you might want to go a little further. You might want to get even, you should be able to get a certification from the issuer, whether it's, I don't know, State Department or whatever. So it'll be on official letterhead, or you can get it even notarized. Or, what is that thing where you get the ambassador, the consulate, apostille?
Yeah, okay, but, okay, you're dealing with someone, like I said, this is an ID from
1928.
1928. The person is, the features have changed, which is the requirement that the feature
I see
should
what you
be
mean.
likeness of the person. So this person is now 80 years old, and you know how true to the identity are we being by saying we can accept this because the person says this is all they have.
Again, like I said, you'd have to go through other measures, the apostille. I mean, the consular services are representative of the government. So I think if you could get an apostille on that, somebody to verify that that is the person. Because the thing is, these requirements are not meant to keep people out of the system. That's why we came up with the risk-based approach actually before the FATF even did it. Because we found that there were persons who didn't have two forms of ID. Our prescriptive list in 2001 January, you had to have two forms of government-issued ID and two copies of a utility bill. Suppose you have no BEC and no BTC. So that means you wouldn't get a relationship.
We have clients where they have utility bills, but
It's not in their names.
no addresses are on the utility bills where they're from. So we run into that issue.
So you have to get something else. That's why the risk-based approach came about. So you could get some of the documentation that give you a level of comfort that this is where the person lived, or the nationality, or the likeness. Because you're gonna find that. You're gonna find some persons don't have the list of requirements.
Yeah, if you have a relationship manager who has met with the person before, they will provide you with a letter stating that they've met
This
this
is the
person
person.
at this address, they've lived there for X amount of years. They know that
Exactly.
this is.
Exactly. So you have to get alternative documentation. Unless you don't want to deal with them. You see what I'm saying? And sometimes those 80-year-old people is the ones that have the millions, so they're the ones that pay your salary, you know what I mean?
You can request that photo. Just answer the photo and have it certified.
Yeah. That's it.
Or, yeah, that's true. You could have that and then request that he get an up-to-date photo and have that apostille or certified. That's true. Yeah, and you attach that with his national ID. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you see. You need to rewrite this thingy. Okay. Again, 6 scenarios which determine who should be verified. In case of prospective customers, identity must be carried out before the customer is allowed to become facility holder. Okay, must. When the amount of an occasional transaction exceeds 15,000, the customer must be, identity of the customer must be carried out before, or verification I should say, before the transaction is conducted. And when the amount of the occasional transaction exceeds 15, and it's suspected that he is operating for somebody else or on behalf of another, there need to be, within a reasonable time I guess, because the person will be there but the other person wouldn't, to carry out your CDD on that person, okay? Once you become aware, because sometimes, like I said, they're very smooth, especially if they want to hide that they're working or acting for another. When a provider knows, suspects, or reasonably have grounds to suspect, again, carrying out a transaction that involves a crime, or is attempting to avoid the enforcement of POCA. Okay? This will allow you to file your STR. Alright? When a provider suspects that the funds, again, defined in the Anti-Terrorism Act, or financial services are related to or are to be used to facilitate an offense, they need to be verified. And I have a little envy there. Where satisfactory evidence of identity is required, no transaction should be conducted over the facility pending receipt of identification of evidence and information. Sometimes you'll open the account, but you'll have to get the other information before you allow them to transact over the account. Okay? So the documents of title should not be issued nor income remitted in the absence of identity verification. Alright? That's restating it, so I won't go over that. Now, further verification is required when there is a material change in the way the customer is operating. And that could have very well happened. Do you remember that guy that came and said he would pay people mortgages? Did he contact us? I think he didn't. He contacted a bank, and the bank came to us saying that he had gotten something through a will.
Yeah.
Couple of $1 million through a will, and the central bank was holding up his money, and he had all these people giving him $35 or whatever it was, and he was going to pay off their bunch of nonsense. He probably didn't have 2 cents to rub against each other before that, and he milked a lot of people out of their money. We reported him. The commercial crime units went and investigated him, but guess what? Everybody was so ashamed that they would take and nobody would come forward and say they gave money. It's not a soul. The police said we can't prosecute. So he went to Freeport and he did the same thing. You know, he left here and went to Freeport. He did the same thing. That guy got away with several thousands of dollars. But nobody wanted to come forward. If there was material change in his account, he should have been verified again. We couldn't get a copy of the will, because we wanted a copy of the will so we could start investigating this. Of course, he wouldn't let that go. That in itself, uncooperative, they should have stopped this nonsense. Anyway, the following documentation advised for legal entities, companies, okay? Certified copies of incorporation document, that includes the certificate of incorporation, okay? And your articles and memorandums of association. Board resolution. Now, these documents are suggested. They're not mandatory. But any CEO who's worth their salt is going to get sufficient information on that company to know that it's an authorized company from the company registry, it's in good standing, okay? Satisfactory evidence of IDs of all signatories on the account, okay? Natural persons, if those signatories have to be dealt with just like if they were opening individual accounts. So you get the same thing on them as you get with persons coming in to open their own accounts, okay? And of course, it has to be authorized by the board. That's why you get a board resolution. Satisfactory evidence of IDs of controlling shareholders, if not a traded company. Anybody holding 10% or more, all right? And that has caused a lot of furor sometimes. Private companies, of course, they want to remain what? Private. Why do I mean? Yeah, because you own that company, so they have to know who they're dealing with. Okay? 10% or more is relevant because it is the standard by Basel where you're considered having major stock. Okay? Or representation on the equity of the company. Certificate of good standing, nature of the entity's business, reasons for establishing the customer relationship, potential profile. So you go down basically the same thing as if they were an individual. It is a legal person. Copies of POCA, say POCA. That's the power of attorney as necessary. Copies of list of registered of directors, officers. This will allow you to know who this company really is. Because sometimes you do not know who is controlling this company. So the controllers probably need to be verified, not probably, should be verified, because you need to know who you're dealing with. Who is your client? Yes.
Question. I've seen some cases where the directors are actually companies. So how far do you go?
Ah.
I mean,
Now-
they intend to layer, so I mean, how do you get to the bottom?
No, you should know who they're owned by. And most of the time in the Bahamas or even in fiduciary or private placements, not private banking, they'd be owned by the trust company. Most of the time. The trust company that's really the trustee. So they would have corporate directors and corporate secretaries and corporate officers. So if you know it's the trust company, again, when we get to exempt it for the clients, if they're licensed by the Central Bank of the Bahamas, there is some comfort that we've already verified who these people are. Okay, so there's some exemptions. And if they are licensed by a foreign jurisdiction, then you're coming into that list on the FTRR, whether they're on there for comparable or equivalent AML-CFT, pardon? Schedule 1, yes, first schedule. So again, all of that come into it. It's not as simple as that. But you should go behind who those corporate people are. Okay? Usually when there's corporate directors, there is a company, a trust company at the end of it. Or a firm of direct lawyers or accountants, somebody is using it to do something, you need to know who. Written confirmation that all amounts flowing through the account will be the benefit of the company. That is very important for later on if a case is brought against them. Okay? Satisfactory evidence to verify at least 2 directors. Now, I don't know how they pick them. I'm sure there'll be a fight because that person have to spill their beans. Okay, we have to know who they are. We're going to hold somebody. And that is just the floor, ladies and gentlemen. You might want information on all of them, peoples. Okay? So don't just go and say, well, Central Bank says only 2. No. If you think all of them, then do all of them. Okay? All right, the exemptions. Bahamian and foreign financial institutions, that's just what I said just a minute ago. Okay? Once you're satisfied that this company does exist, that it is licensed by the proper authority and subject to AML-CFT standards equivalent to what we have here, then they can be exempted. Usually you get a letter. We get letters all the time asking us to provide confirmation that this licensee is licensed and the date and if they are in compliance with the requirements as per the central bank. The bank that is calling in would, or asking us, would have that as their documentation. Okay? We've advised that they can have an exemption to that effect. Occasional transactions, when transactions are 50,000 or lower. Caution is sounded as if there are suspicions. Then you have to carry out your due diligence. And not even if there's suspicion, I will put another note here before I send this out. That does not mean that you don't do anything. Are you going to let somebody just walk into your provider office with $15,000 or $14,999 and not ask for even a driver's license or something? Because it might come back to bite you. Wire transfers. Occasional transactions, usually wire transfers. Money transmissions. Exempted clients. Superannuation schemes. Good gracious. Okay? Occupational retirement pension plans, which do not allow employee participation. Licensees, of course, of COB, ICB, XCB, and the gaming board. Now, it did not, I know we always get these inquiries. Are the FCSPs included since they went under the SCB? I'm not sure.
I'm not licensed, so shouldn't they fall in that category?
They still have their own inspector and whatnot. And
Yeah, we're the inspector.
we usually get some, again, we usually get some queries, but again, you have to verify that they're properly licensed and they're probably, you see what I'm saying, in good standing. Some licensees maybe have a license that they could give you, but the central bank has gone on examinations and certain things ain't right. You may not want to have a facility with that company, okay?
Sir, there's not licenses for gaming boards.
Yeah.
Casinos,
Yeah,
which are inherently high risk,
yeah.
requiring high students.
Listen here, from the time we put our act together, that's been a question. But again, we can only say they decided, in all their good wisdom, to add the casinos. I don't know why,
But they're regulated, aren't
by the gaming board.
they? And they're inspected, they're
They inspected, yes, but like she said, it's very, very high risk. Very high risk. And some people were asking, even at international levels, why don't you put the gaming board there? Again, we could only say that's a governmental decision. But nobody can force you to give an account or facility to anybody. I'll tell you, about a couple of years back, probably 5 years, this gentleman from Trinidad had a very big business. I had no reason to suspect that he was into anything, but none of the banks, offshore banks, not the offshore, he wanted a commercial bank on the US book side to give him a facility. None of them would give him a facility. So he called us complaining. Well, Ms. Knowledge, you represent the licensee licensor of these banks and trusts. Can you talk on my, I said, no, I can't. Nope. They are responsible for taking on their own clients. I can't tell them who to take. If I do, then we take the risk if something happens. We can't do that. So again, even though they have gaming board there, what did I say? This is the flaw. You might have your own policies superimposed upon, okay? And you take the risk, okay? Foreign institutions located, the first schedule as we had said, again, equivalent authorities, COB, CBOB, ICB, SCB, and the gaming board. Central government or statutory bodies. Can you imagine trying to get documentation of statutory bodies? Yeah, we have to exempt them. You'd be waiting from here to Shabim. Traded companies on BISX or other exchange approved by the SCB. Okay? Regulated investment funds in countries listed again, or equivalent to SCB. Application for insurance with respect to pension schemes connected to one's employment. Insurance contracts not exceeding total premium $2,500. And any Bahamian dollar facility of or below. And again, that's a caution. It's the floor. Okay? You must document your basis for putting licensees in that category, especially outside the central government and agencies. You have to document. Because when the regulators come in, they're going to test, and it probably will have some of those risk rated as low, because only low risk will be in simplified anyway. If it have $2 and it's high, it better be high when we come in. Okay? Again, simplified is related to low risk accounts to begin with. So you have to document your decision, make sure it's supported properly when you are reviewed by your regulatory authorities. Enhanced. Customers are not physically present for ID purposes. Definitely that's high risk. Correspondent banking relationships, and usually the offshore industry will not have these, but our commercial banks do. For smaller offshore banks, they are correspondent banks for these banks. And there's been a lot of kick-up lately for the last year because of what's happening in the US. Wells Fargo, it was in the papers, so it's no secret, Wells Fargo has been cutting ties, meaning they offering correspondent banking relationship with other licensees, especially where they perceive it's from an offshore jurisdiction. Why? Because they were doing, or they perceive that they're doing something similar to what I told you about when that offshore bank had its account frozen. They have their clients moving funds through their account, and because they don't have the CDD on those clients, then they don't want those accounts with them. So correspondent banking relationships, very, very, I wouldn't say risky, but they have some risk to it. Because those banks use our commercial banks to facilitate their transfers all over the world. So commercial banks have to be very careful. Any of the offshore banks or the trust companies, they have to go through, yes, a local bank?
No, I was just wondering if the risk isn't a little exaggerated in here. Because
It's really exaggerated.
Like any other financial institution.
It's
If a
exaggerated.
bank wants to engage you, you
Yes.
do the CDD on them.
Yes. No, in your CDD chapter, number 5, it went nuts. It went nuts. And that is because I think they were going back to the Patriot Act when it first came in. And remember I told you about Antigua and Barbuda? They got crucified. All of their licensees that had corresponding accounts with United States were terminated. And I think they keep going back to that old scenario. Now all you do, like Ms. O'Brien said, you do your due diligence. And then you assess the risk. And if it's too risky for you, well, you don't open the account. Okay? But it's very difficult for a licensee, an offshore licensee, to operate without having some relationship with a commercial bank. Because they have the hanging expenses, staff salaries, premises, and if you can't get an account, then the only other thing is to come to central bank and get an exemption for paying in US dollars, and that's difficult to do, okay? We don't really allow the mixing of the two without a lot of conditions. Okay, PEP facilities with persons emanating from countries known to have inadequate standards, and corporate clients able to issue bearer shares. Again, just stressing it for you, all right? Now, due to the increased reputation, operational, other risks related to the relationship types listed, these relationships should be subject to special approval, more involved documentation. This is where your source of wealth, of course, if they're persons, and source of funds to establish the relationship. When you're looking at enhanced DCDD, close scrutiny of complex structures, foundations, trusts, use of multiple jurisdictions, frequent monitoring, because this is your high-risk group. Okay? Detect any changes, pinpoint corruption or misuse of public assets, money laundering of any sort. Wake y'all up? Okay. The ongoing CDD. Okay? What is next? Then you put up your monitoring. This is when you've already gone past now, you've gotten them into the system. Then you have to have your systems and controls to review and to monitor ongoing. The timing of the reviews and the nature of the monitoring will depend on the risk of the relationships. The higher perceived risk or known risk, the more frequent reviews and checks on the relationship. Okay? I think I had a little note here on one of these. Yes. With respect to your book itself, it has a very, very nice laid out chart here on 227. Interpretation of CDD regulations before we go on. I thought it was excellent because it follows some of the guides we've been given to our banks. Almost like reading our minds. Because when we first started, like I said, in 2001, we just found a lot of generic descriptors. Profits, when you're looking at what is source of wealth. Profits, that tells us nothing. Okay? Sales, that tells us nothing. So again, it gives you some very good working, I would say practical application for what you should get for the nature and detail of business. Okay? Again, imports, exports tell the regulator nothing, it tells you nothing. With respect to enhanced due diligence, if you have to, when you're looking at the details of business, real estate, still insufficient. But then you need to break it down. And then you will be able to risk rate it properly with respect to the products that they offer, with respect to who's involved, and where they import, export to. Okay? I think one of your examples in the book, actually it's your homework. China, Mexico. Where are they doing business? What? You see what I'm saying? They could have even made it a little worse. The former Soviet bloc. But even what I found. Because nobody knows really. They've just come out of communism. They really have no past. No long-term past with the Western world. When communism first was, should I say, terminated, lack of a better word, you had banks trying to come out of Russia to establish in the Bahamas. And we had several feelers of banks. And the problem with it is, we even went so far as to get, is it this investigative company out of Washington? Because we couldn't do the due diligence ourselves. We were coming up with a roadblock. We were calling persons, do you know, can we get information? We couldn't get much information on them in doing the due diligence. And I think it's Kessler. It's an very big investigative company out of Washington. And they had contacts in Russia, and they were able to get information out that we couldn't get out on these people. The shareholders, information out of the Central Bank of Russia. And when we started to get all the information in, we said, you know what? Based on what we see, we don't want to deal with these people. And it was a little tricky because this was a very big bank in Russia. So why does the Bahamas want to deal with Russia? And they were only following their people. So does that tell you? The Russians were coming. We had a good group of Russians buying up some of our real estate. And of course, banks go where their nationals are. Like the Brazilians were buying up, some Brazilian banks came. So they wanted to facilitate the purchases of property and whatnot. But we had a problem. We could not establish our CDB at a comfortable level. And so we said no. Eventually, one of them got it. Everybody knows that one, right? Guta Bank. Guta Bank, they had that nice little building right there on the foreshore, Montague, set in nice little, the white or whatever. They actually left due to certain information that started to surface, unfortunately for them, because they got into the system. They were the more sturdy of the group, but they eventually had to leave. So again, with CDD, this is excellent to get. I think it's a practical guide as to how to think of information that could be, let's say it like this, like Mr. Singh used to say, stand muster. I'm not sure what I mean, but anyway. He's always saying, you gotta get information that stand muster. I'm like, stand muster. Anyway, must be hold water. You know what I mean? Let's go to Bahamas, hold water. But again, it gives you some good ideas of what would be reasonable. Again, that's what you want. You want documentation that will be reasonable to support your risk rating or your acceptance of the client and your monitoring. Okay? Of your documentation. And let's see, there was one other thing here. Again, with the source of wealth on page 245. I thought it was a good one as well, because we were trying to get this across to some of our licensees, and I don't know how the SCB did it. And well, Ms. O'Brien would know that that was always a sore point with a lot of the licensees. What is something that you can have? It's too generic to say savings, profits from investments, inheritance, business dealings. We want something of substance. Okay? Very, very down to earth. Of course, a salary, monthly salary would be your top, right? Or your bank statement that shows your transfers.
I
Yes.
like how you mentioned the idea of inheritance, because that's a question I wanted to ask. How do you deal with inheritance?
Get a will. Get a will. Get a copy of the will. If you can't get a copy, again, alternatively, you're gonna have to get something to show that this is all money. Something. Well, of course, I mean, let's take the Heinz brothers.
Right.
Heinz brothers is the heirs to Heinz fortune. They're billionaires. Now, if they were to come to you, again, if they don't have a will with their father passing on the business to them or whatever, you should be able to get enough information on their fortune, their main operating companies. You gotta have something that shows that they're substance-based guys, and it's relevant or relative to the amount of business that they're gonna do through you. So you might not have the will, but you know that, hey, they own. You have something to show that the Heinz Trust or whatever, you see what I'm saying? So you need to get something relative to the volume that you're dealing with and the people you're dealing with. For instance, Mr. What's his name? John McCain, his wife is the heir to the Budweiser fortune. So why do I look at those things? I only read what I need to read. Remember that. But that's important. You see what I'm saying? The Budweiser fortune. So again, you should be able to tie her to that somehow. If she's much richer than her husband. Okay? Budweiser owns what that game preserve is in Tampa? Busch Gardens. People don't even know that. I know these little tidbits. Anyway, but again, alternative, you have to get alternative documentation on, I'm just giving you ideas, alternative documentation on these people. Because some of them are going to be very ticklish. They might not want you to have the will. Because there's other things in there that you shouldn't know. You know what I mean? But you should be able to get something to tie them to their wealth. And once you do that, you make sure you document whatever it is, wherever you got it from, if you can get copies of documents or whatever. Write a nice detailed memo, and if you're not the senior officer, present them to them, and they sign off on that. This is our documentation. It's reasonable for assuming da-da-da-da. I think we have to come to that compromise with the licensees, because they thought we wanted just the will, or they wanted this or that. No, we said get comparable information that can support your assumptions or the information you're putting in that account. It could stand up. You're not just going to say inheritance. That's too loose. What is it? The Busch Gardens is the game reserve. It's the Budweiser, Coal and Fire. These guys have a lot of footprints. Once they're in the billions, they got footprints out there.
What if their family's not out there as Budweiser?
If they're not out there and they're middle class with only $200 million. Well, I mean, with the big wigs, that's middle class. So if you're looking at the offshore middle class, well, I think you still can find some. You should be able to find something. But you need something. You just can't have the file empty. That's what I'm trying to get to.
The lawyers can
Verify.
They can
Yes.
tell you how much.
That's
They
true.
can certify how much.
They can verify. And they are not gonna certify. I'll tell you one thing we came up against.
What?
We had very, very wealthy people coming in the early days to set up their own trust companies, right, or PDCs. And they said, well, how much do we need to certify? And I'm going, how much really? How much do you have? But they don't want to fully disclose I'm worth 2 billion, or I'm worth this, again, because you gotta, where they're coming from. Most of these guys are from Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. You see them old, and you know, those countries, they all are monopolies. So they own the farms and the manufacturing plants and the gas and the oil and the, so they're billionaires. So I know I had an application and the guy asked me and I said, oh, well, let me see your projections. And he gave me his business plan, like quickly flipped through it, and he wanted to have about 5-10 years, he wanted to have like 200 million, 300 million. I said, well, if you could certify $500 million for me. He says, that's all. I said, that's all? No, but they're very old money. They own all the car dealerships and everything, you know? So, again, it's relative. You get as much information as you can out of them. Okay? No, I mean, my perspective of rich changed. I say, you know, you're thinking of trying to get $1 billion and you cool. Yeah. You know? You're serving one of these guys. Okay. Now, with respect to ownership, I wanted to mention this as well. Look at page 247. Look at how they unwrap that ownership. This is what you have to do. If a lawyer comes to you representing a client and he only says, well, I'm representing Mr. Big so-and-so, and he wants to have a trust and he wants to have an operating company, but when you start to go into Mr. Big and he wants to own the trust company by a company, and perhaps he's not telling you the whole thing, if you look at this, you see how this is? As you start to unwrap or unravel, you go up and you find somebody else who company Y is 60% shareholder of company C. Oh, that's interesting. Mr. E is 40% shareholder of company C. Okay? And you try to tally at the top who are the major shareholders. And that's how you do it. Every I would say corporate entity you come to in the structure of your client, you need to ask questions. Who are the major shareholders, 10% or more? Let me see them. And it might be only be 2 people, 40% and 6% like these people. Then you go up, you say, well, that's a company. Who was behind that company? Okay, there's another company. Who was behind that company? And you got to do some simple math as to who are the major shareholders, and those are that's your client. You need to get all the documentation on them. Okay? So unwrapping beneficial ownership, you say how far. If it's owned by a trust company, the corporate directors, well, you know you can hold a trust company. But if that keeps going up, you need to find the natural person behind it. Okay? And if it's a trust, that gets a little tricky, because then the beneficiaries are usually the people, but they might have unborn, those unborn. So those that are not vested, remember the act says something about unvested, you put them aside for now until they become vested. And then you know you got to zero in on those beneficiaries. Alright? Because of course, before all the hullabaloo about money laundering, you had what they call, is it black trust? It was where no information was kept. Blind trust, that's it, blind trust. And those were susceptible to money laundering. I mean, you don't know who were the beneficiaries, who the settler. That was in the old days. That can't even pass anymore. Yes.
I would ask you about the threshold for beneficial ownership. 10% of premiums, you say, comes from
Basel.
But yet I know there's a lot of jurisdictions.
25%.
And 25%.
I see 25% there.
How do you account for the difference? Because I would think some of the countries that are using 25% are members of the Basel Committee.
They probably are. But this comes from Jersey. Because these guys are, I think, behind me, probably connected to Jersey, Chad Miles. 25%. We had that, and if I remember correctly, when we were drafting the guidelines, there was a debate, because it used, I'm not sure it used to be, but from the best practices, we decided it would be better to stick with 10%. Why? Because a lot of time, and again, it's relative to the jurisdiction, because a lot of times you see the same thing. You see husband, wife, son, daughter with some of these shareholdings, and then over time the practice has been consolidate. So you probably can't find a trust document or deed, but you know that they are shams. So we wanted to go down a little further. Now, of course, you have private family companies, and you expect them to be owned by the family. But then when you have licensees, and we had a requirement that you had to have 5 independent shareholders owning a licensee, for the reason that we did not want concentrated ownership dealing with public funds, third-party funds. Because of course the controller is who makes the decisions when the regulator is not breathing down his neck. But I understand where you're coming from, but we decided to stay with 10%. Okay? Most of Basel Committee, most of their best practices, especially with the capital and some other things, they would give you some latitude. Bahamas has always been a little conservative. Okay? Jersey don't get hit on. We do. Okay. One of the other things that I had pinpointed oh no, that's just, I went through that. Let's finish. Go back over that. Okay. That's the detour. Let's go back. Okay. With respect to when you're talking with monitoring, when you are setting up your monitoring systems, you need to have something pliable enough to look at your transaction type, the frequency, the amount, the geographical origin or destination, and the account signatories. You should never have your account having transactions going from, for instance, from the company, no, that's when closing accounts, sorry, that's closing accounts. In monitoring this, you would be assured if your account is terminated, the funds that is left on the account should only go back to the originator of the account. Because we found some things in suspicious transaction reports where the originator of the account was sending it to somebody else. You don't allow that. That is suspicious. Because again, unless you have a very good reason to support that, that is a problem. That's a red flag. Prudent monitoring will consist of both information technology, computerized floor levels, that is, and human manual actual reviews. Now, computerized floor levels should be relative. A lot of systems that we found until recently were not very, how should I put it? Yes, where there'll be a 15,000 floor for you and a 10,000 floor for you and a 20,000 for you. That's how it should be. Not 15,000 across the board, because that is not applicable to everybody. And that's what you had in some systems. You had people, well, it wasn't 15,000, so I didn't pick up on it. Or it didn't red flag for me to look at. No, it should be relative to your account activity and your profile. Okay? So if there is a computerized floor or system in your workplace, you need to make sure it's relative to the person or the entity. Strong corporate compliance structure emanating from the top. Okay? The only way you can monitor properly if you have a strong corporate compliance structure, because you need support. You don't need to be knocked flat on your butt every time you go up there to say no to an account. And of course, in your case, That man probably didn't just knock her flat, he probably knocked her out. Okay? Because there was no corporate strong culture from the top. There has to be. There has to be support. Trained professionals who know the customers and their business operations allow for effective. Again, there is no alternative to knowing your customer. There's just no alternative. We had an example in the local environment, a cash-intensive business. This banker went out, he stood on the corner, and if I tell you where it is, you'll know the business, so I won't disclose. But he went out and he was noticing the flow of traffic in and out because it was a lot of cash coming in on a regular basis. Every week you had good money coming in. So he was a very prudent person. He didn't stay behind his desk and just took what the person said. He watched. And sure enough, there was a lot of activity, going back and forth, back and forth. And then a couple of weeks passed and the amount actually almost quadrupled. So he said it wasn't that much activity. But guess, so it was sort of smart. Might as well bring a whole case. But the thing is, that site visit allowed him to know his customer a little more on the operations and to actually assume, he was able to assume that the level of business coming through that client. And some of these businesses, I'll give you an example, like big gas stations. I mean, some of them is be chicken. I mean, people go in lines, especially if the gas price drop. Okay? I'm one of them. If it's Esso, I don't go to nobody else. Shell less of my engine. Okay. But the thing is, if he didn't know that client, if he didn't have some information, I mean, first-hand information that he could attest to, that gave him an idea that something was wrong here. Quadrupled in deposits, something is wrong. Sometimes those clients are susceptible, is that it? Yes. Okay. What y'all say? Two, what we heard was going on. I don't know if it's still happening. I'm hoping it doesn't, because then you put, people in business who are trying to make a living at risk, where you would have people, drug lords or drug snurfs, come and ask them to put monies in their account, and they get a percentage. Because it's a legitimate business, you could easily just mingle it, but perhaps they did it too much. And in that case, the business was investigated. And actually, eventually, the business was closed down. But the thing is, you have to know your customer. There's no alternative for knowing your customer. Maybe for documentation, but not knowing your customer, okay? You have to know your customer. Record keeping. Very, very important. The only way that the regulators and the authorities can trace any cases that come up, STRs, suspicious transactions, is if you have proper records. And I did not list all of it. I told you to go to the guidelines. The guidelines are there. They have what you need to be keeping. But the most important thing is keep something so that there would be a paper trail, an audit trail. And you have to keep it for 5, well, you wouldn't be keeping it, but if your bank goes into liquidation, now it's mandatory as well. It used to be assumed that the information would be kept, but an amendment was put in, so even if your bank or your provider goes out of business, the documentation still have to be kept 5 years after the termination of the business. But of course, if you kick somebody out of your provider, you still have to keep the information 5 years after the termination of the relationship. Okay? This allows for any case to come up and be prosecuted properly. All right? Any queries or questions? We'll stop there for tonight. Queries or questions? You have a little bit more to go on for your case, right? And we'll finish up next week. Okay, tell you what, do you have some, groups in here? Because if you give me a couple of emails, I'll just send them out to you. Because I did send them to, the institute, I don't know if they have problems, because now, some of them are big, because you know, these slides, files are very big, like 2 megabytes. So if you don't have a Hotmail or Gmail or something that can take that volume, you need to tell your email, they'll bounce back. They're big. Okay? So if you give me some emails or whatnot, and if you can send them on to friends, that'll be good. I'll just send them out tomorrow. Because I have them.
These slides, they don't have my
Oh, they don't have these yet. They don't have them next week. If you give me emails, I will send them out to you. Maybe that's why I That's it for tonight. Make sure you get your slides. Ask Miguel to give you your slides, please, if you haven't gotten it.
No, that was mailed to me.
But yeah, I show you his stamp.
Hello, if you want to, and if you want me to try to send you the slides as well, you could write down this email for me, and just send me an email and I'll return it with the slides for you. It's LESACJ@hotmail.com. Okay? Now the files are very big, so if your Hotmail well, Hotmail is big, so you should be able to get it. That's LESACJ@hotmail.com.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
I just did a Red Cross wall. See the mouse? No, I just did it. Oh, I see it. No, can't go to all of them. Somebody else will go. Okay, you do it.
I can send you this,
Ready? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, good night.
Just notice your email that you were just giving, out.
Yeah,
If
it's my
persons
contact.
have questions, they can,
What if you might want to,